This is Marc Sims, just asking a few questions, just a few questions. I have Alden Loury on the line. Alden Loury is the senior editor of WBEZ, the public radio station, which is so good. WBEZ's Race, Class, and Communities Desk. You're the senior editor, so you edit everything, right?
For this desk, yes. There's four reporters on the desk, and so yes, I'm I'm the editor for this team, and excited to be here. It's been about a year and a half. The reporters are phenomenal, and the environment here has been very accommodating. Love the energy, and happy to be back in a kind of a daily news environment as well. So having a lot of fun with it, and feel a real sense of mission and commitment to really explore these issues and offer the Chicago region and the down and dirty on what these issues mean and how they have such a deep impact on these particular communities, but throughout the region as a whole. So great to be on with you, Mark. It's been a while, but man, it's nice to
It's been
talk.
about, 15, 20 years when I had you on the public access show, and I don't remember nothing about it, but we'll talk about that some other time. But for many years, even before you got to WBZ, Alden, you've been doing so many stories about the black depopulation or the black folks that's leaving Chicago left and right. What is that all about?
I don't think it's like a simple story. I mean, it's complex, and I've been fascinated by it because I think it says something broader about what this city, means to black people, how welcoming or unwelcoming the city has become for black folks. I think the depopulation is a sign to Chicago and its leadership that there's a real problem here with the experience of African Americans, and it should be something that should be near the top of their list of priorities to address. And I'd be remiss not to mention that there is a report coming out on Thursday. The University of Illinois at Chicago, their Institute for Race and Public Policy has done a deep dive into the numbers, and so they're going to be sharing that report on Thursday, and I will be among a number of other folks who will be sharing some thoughts about it at their public event Thursday morning at UIC at 8:30. I would say I think it's multifaceted. The main takeaways that I've seen in my research is that lower income, lower educated, younger black folks are having the hardest time, and the population decline has been felt most by those folks. And so when I think about the climate in Chicago with regard to housing, with regard to education, with regard to economics, and to some degree with regard to violence, that all of those things are factors that have essentially led many younger, lower income, lower skilled black folks to say, you know what, I'd rather take my chances in Springfield, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, in Northwest Indiana, Rockford, Peoria, other parts of Illinois. And the numbers, when we look at particularly those folks, that segment of the black community, those are the places where they've gone. They've gone to closer metropolitan areas. They've gone to other smaller parts of Illinois. So I think, in a nutshell, that's kind of what I've taken away from what I've looked at with this phenomenon. That's not to say that there aren't middle class or upper middle class black folks that are leaving as well. A number of them moving to farther parts of the suburban areas, including Northwest Indiana, but also to DuPage County and the South suburban area, even to Will County, which has become kind of a little destination spot for black folks. But then some of them have also gone to places like Atlanta and Houston, Dallas, farther places out. So there's something happening here, and like I said, I think it should be something that should be talked about a lot more. And so I'm eager that this report is coming out, and hopefully that'll spark some conversations, and we'll get more people talking about this.
Yeah, before I get you off the line here, there was a professor, I forget his name, I can't even pronounce his name, but he's I think a professor emeritus for UIC. He was one on WBEZ's Curious City program, but in the midst of that WBEZ Curious City program, he mentioned that he imagines that, or he thinks that most Chicago neighborhoods change in about 3 generations. And I say that because Bronzeville's been a black neighborhood for 100 years, but neighborhoods are going to change. People are going to move. People are going to die, pass away. They're going to move away. So I think some of the discussion should be we're going to lose black population. But as we lose black population, how do we make the smaller black community more vibrant, more dynamic, and not known for crime?
Well, I think Brownsville is perhaps a part of Chicago to think about that is perhaps on that trajectory. Those are the parts of Black Chicago that have probably lost the least population, and I would say some parts of what we call maybe Greater Bronzeville. I'm talking about Douglas and Grand Boulevard, Kenwood, Oakland, those communities, Washington Park as well. Those communities, particularly Oakland, Douglas, and North Kenwood. Now, it's interesting, Mark, because there was a time, like in the 90s, when Ida B. Wells was still up, Madden Park was still up, and then a little farther to the west of there, we had Stateway and Taylor and the Ickes homes. These were some of the poorest black communities in Chicago, and so those developments are gone. There's been a lot of reinvestment. There's been a lot of reinvestment by black folks in those communities, and so they have maintained their racial character, but the income level, the education level, the upward mobility of those communities has improved a great deal. And there's still a fairly significant low-income population in those communities, but there has been a tremendous growth in middle-class black folks moving to those neighborhoods and refurbishing the old graystones and brownstones and other properties there that have been there since the days of Duke Ellington and other notable black folks who lived in Bronzeville in the 30s and 40s. And so those communities are growing, and they're growing in their property values, they're growing in their income level. There is a real renaissance kind of happening in those communities, and that they're keeping their black character, but they are also attracting folks who are not black, and they're attracting money from folks who are not black. And I think there is a growing fear that Bronzeville, which is like the heart of, that's the birthplace of Black Chicago, that at some point may not look like what it has looked like. But at least I would say right now, and maybe for the next 20, maybe even 30 years or so, what you're describing, I think we are seeing that happen in that community. Now, in some of the farther neighborhoods, your Inglewoods and your West Inglewoods, your Greater Grand Crossings, your Auburn Greshams, those, even Chatham, those communities are thinning out. So those are communities where, perhaps there is a greater sense of, what's going to happen, to those communities in the short term. But Bronzeville, I think, may be the place to think about what you're describing. Even if the population shrinks, it's getting more economically stable, more economically powerful, and those are communities that we can maybe have a brighter sense of what their outlook might be.
Yeah, but I don't live in Bronzeville. I live in those other communities that you mentioned. And I see the decline, and I see that partly because of income inequality. There are a lot of black folks who have done quite well with this income inequality. They went to school, got a good education. They're doing okay. But there's a lot of folks like me who did go to school, didn't do anything, and didn't make any money. We're going to continue to struggle. And so how do we make it? How do we eliminate the crime knowing that we're not going to make any money? We're always going to be under 50,000 or 100, whatever the magic number is. We're always going to be struggling financially on some level. How do we make those neighborhoods more stable?
That's a good question, Mark, and I don't know the 100% right answer. One thing I do know is that particularly in the area of crime. And when I was at Metropolitan Planning Council, we looked at some of those numbers, and when you have, and this is in Black Chicago, and even in some of the neighborhoods that are known for high levels of crime, or at least higher levels of crime, places like Roseland, for instance, there are parts of Roseland where the crime rate is actually comparable to what you'd find, pretty much in neighborhoods that you would consider safe. And those are the parts of Roseland where there are a higher number of high earning homes. There are higher levels of education. There are lower levels of poverty. Factors like that seem to go along with lower levels of violence, education, and income. And so, you talked about this income inequality within the black community. Uh, the the strength of like the black communities of old, when we were segregated, by law into certain communities, is that all facets across the economic spectrum of Black Chicago were living right next door to one another, and they had to rely on one another, and that reliance helped build some level of stability and solidarity. And when Black folks have been able to move, higher income Black folks have gone to places where they hadn't been able to go before. And in the aftermath of that, lower income folks are kind of left behind in those communities, and they're not as equipped to draw investment or interest from the community as a whole, in broad total, and those communities suffer as they are also suffering economically. And so I think it's important for the community to see some sense of solidarity and obligation to one another, even if there's the ability to move and go other places. And so I think it would be great if Black folks who are of means would consider planting roots in places like Inglewood and West Inglewood, near where you grew up there, Mark, where I grew up, and say, hey, we're going to plant our seeds here and really kind of help bring some economic stability to this Black community. I think that would help, and it would, I think, also help attract investment from outside the community, because they know that there are folks of means in this community. But it also means that the city as a whole has to offer broad economic opportunity for folks who don't have high levels of education, who don't have high levels of skills. We've done some reporting in the past year looking at manufacturing and its decline, and how that has such a tremendous impact on Black Chicago, particularly on the west side, where there are a number of manufacturing hubs that were lost without a whole lot of replacement, either from retail or other parts of the economy. So there needs to be a broad-based approach, providing our lower-income Black folks, lower-skilled Black folks with real economic opportunities, and then Black folks who have done well for themselves have to kind of, I think, show more of a commitment to kind of helping to stabilize those Black communities. That would just be my thought, just based on some of the stuff that I've looked at and reported on over the years.
Can I have you back?
Of course, man. Of course.
we got to chit chat more. Alden Loury from WBZ, senior editor for the Race Class and Communities Desk. You're the man. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me on. And brother, you're the man. I mean, you bringing people together, you bringing up these issues and having conversations, and enjoyed the show, and had always thought over the years, like, man, I need to catch up with Mark, and see what he's got going on. It'd be great to talk to him again. So glad to be back, and would love to do it again. So just reach out and let me know.